This is a new Indonesia Project Global Seminar co-badged with the FKP or Development Studies Forum Seminar Series. My name is Arianto Patunru, and I would like to start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional lands I'm hosting this webinar, and pay my respect to the elders past and present. We are grateful for the support from the Australian National University and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Today, we will have a discussion about IKN or Nusantara, the new proposed capital city of Indonesia. We are grateful to have three distinguished speakers, Dr. Aichiro Suryo Prabowo from Monash University, Indonesia, Professor Thomas Pepinsky from Cornell University, and Professor Alexander Rothenberg from Syracuse University. Thanks for your availability, especially given the complexity of lining up the different time zones of US, Indonesia, and Australia. And thanks to Lydia Napitupulu for coordinating this. Today's discussion will feature two recent papers. Aichiro and Tom have a paper that is coming up in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies based on their study on IKN, focusing on the issues of public funding and public support of mega project. Alex and his co-authors have a working paper on IKN that focuses on its welfare effects. And as usual, we will have Q&A session after the talks. But if you want, you can write your question anytime on the Q&A box, not on the chat box. We will attend to them after the presentation or whenever I see fit. You can also ask verbally later on. And finally, please also kindly respond to the little polling on your screen because we need it to improve our series. Thank you so much. And without further ado, let me first invite Chiro to start the discussion. Over to you, Chiro.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen real quickly. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Pak Acho. Thanks to the NU Indonesia Project and Forum Kajian Pembangunan for the opportunity to present our new paper on Indonesia's new capital city. So Tom and I began this project in 2023 when I had just started my postdoc at Cornell. And I'm very pleased that it is accepted and forthcoming in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies. So the new capital project in Nusantara is Kalimantan, also known as Ibu Kota Negara, or IKN, is arguably the largest public works project in modern Indonesian history. So a growing body of work has analyzed its political, economic, social, and environmental implications. However, none has systematically analyzed the project's costs, and in particular using public budgeting and political economy frameworks. And this is where our paper aims to contribute. The issue of costs is not only relevant, but also central given the project's scale. So to put in perspective, we compared Indonesia's capital relocation with similar cases in other countries. And the distance between Jakarta and the proposed new capital in Nusantara is more than 1,250 kilometers. So if successfully implemented, this would make it the most distant capital relocation on record.
Sorry, Chiro, sorry to cut you. Can you put it on full screen?
I think I did. Is it not appearing? Let me do it one more time. I'm sorry, but what about this?
Yes, good. Thank you.
Is this better?
Yep.
Okay. So where was I? I think, yeah. So again, if implemented successfully, this would make Nusantara, or the relocation to Nusantara, the most distant capital relocation project on record. And importantly, Jakarta and Nusantara are separated by sea, by the Java Sea, by Laut Java, right? Even in long distance cases, such as China's relocation from Nanjing to Beijing in 1949, or Pakistan's from Karachi to Islamabad in 1966, there was no comparable natural barrier. So motivated by Okay. So motivated by these cost considerations, we evaluated the economics and politics of Nusantara project, drawing on frameworks from public budgeting and political economy. So our central question is whether the fiscal burden associated with Nusantara financially and politically feasible. So we arrived at two main findings. One is that the only funding source that can be mobilized at sufficient scale is the central government budget, or the APBN. And two, Indonesians generally support the idea of moving the capital, but they do not necessarily like the idea of paying for it. So taken together, these findings highlight a tension between financial feasibility and political acceptability, so between funding sources that can be mobilized and those that voters actually prefer. So to structure this analysis, we developed a conceptual framework to assess the project's financial and political feasibility. So this is a broad and strategic level approach built around two key dimensions. So funding mobilization on the vertical axis and voter preference on the horizontal axis. So each dimension is then divided into two levels, low and high. So in principle, the ideal funding mechanism would score highly on both dimensions. But in practice, no such option exists, at least at present. So to illustrate, we refer to several funding sources or funding mechanisms relevant to the Nusantara project. So we consider, for example, top left, public funding ranks high in terms of mobilization, because the APBN funds, for example, once approved by the DPR, by the parliament, can be directly dispersed to projects prioritized by the president. So it's under the government's full control. By contrast, private funding, that is the bottom rows, is more limited in terms of mobilization, as it depends on external commitments by investors, which also depend on the project's perceived risk-return profile, something that remains uncertain in the case of Nusantara, right? And then in terms of voter preference, we conjecture that public funding tends to be less popular as it is ultimately financed through taxation, and nobody likes to get taxed, right? What private funding is more nuanced. So foreign private investment is often viewed less favorably. So this is associated with low voter preference due to concerns over sovereignty, whereas domestic private funding tends to be more acceptable, right? This is associated with high voter preference. So we use this framework to guide our public funding analysis, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, and also to design our survey questions for the public support analysis. So the paper has two key sections, one on public funding and another on public support. I'll spend the next few minutes discussing the public funding section, and later Tom will discuss the public support section afterward. And there are 3 points that I want to make, or 3 contradictions that I want to highlight here in terms of timing, and then in terms of scale, and also in terms of cost. First, timing. So capital relocation is not a new idea in Indonesia, right? So the same idea first emerged during Sukarno era in the 50s, and then re-emerged during Suharto era in the late 80s until 1990s, and was discussed again during the Yudhoyono, the SBY presidency around 2009. So this is literally decades in the making. But now, Joko Widodo, or Jokowi, is famous for his infrastructure development policy, right, as we all know. But we did not find him mentioning a new capital project in his Nawacita campaign manifesto in 2014, nor in his medium-term plan, or RPJMN, during his first term between 2014 and 2019. But then, in his second term, from 2019 to 2024, Jokowi was so determined to move this idea forward. So we found that the process was very fast and perhaps rather rushed. So one clear evidence is that the passage of the law on the new capital city, UU IKN, was the fastest among all legislation enacted in 2021. So for comparison, there were 33 national legislation programs or prolegnas in that year. 30 moved to initial committee level deliberation, 18 advanced to plenary session or rapat paripurna, and only 10 had eventually been enacted. So among those reaching the final stage or the final deliberation, the median processing time is 336 days. And by contrast, the IKN law only took 76 days to pass. So, and also another thing I want to highlight here is it is important to situate the process in context. Around 2020 and 2021, Indonesia, like many other countries, was going through the COVID-19 pandemic. So public attention was divided. And given the speed of the deliberation, there was limited opportunity for broader public discussion or public scrutiny, right? Both in terms of the rationale, why the capital had to move, and also the mechanism, like how to move the capital. And this is reflected in the project's poor planning or poor funding strategy, for which I'll discuss in the next slide. So, and this is the second point I want to emphasize, is that building a new capital goes beyond a conventional infrastructure project in Indonesia, at least. So the construction of Nusantara is divided into 5 phases from 2020 until 2045. And the estimated cost for the first phase alone is 466 trillion rupiah, or roughly about 33 billion US dollars. And to put this number in perspective, this amount is larger than the total transfers to village, Dana Desa, over 5 years from 2015 through 2019. And this figure is also just below Indonesia's total health spending, which is a major sector, over the same 5-year period. The scale, and internationally, the scale is way larger than the cost associated with building comparable capitals, such as Astana in Kazakhstan, and also Putrajaya in Malaysia. So relying on the state support only would not be sufficient for the new capital city project. And the state budget would need to be complemented by external funding sources. And as you see, the second point here, right, this is reflected in the financing structure. So of the total 466 trillion rupiah, about 19% or almost 20% is expected to come from the central government budget, or APBN, with the rest relying on a combination of state-owned enterprises, BUMN, and public-private partnerships, or PPPs. So overall, this places Nusantara in a category that is different from the typical infrastructure projects in terms of scale and also in terms of financing structure in Indonesia. And this brings to my last point regarding public funding. Right? So we collected data and we compared funding required and funding raised by sources. So there are 2 sources. The top panel is APBN sources, or the central government budget. The bottom panel is non-APBN sources, or those from from other sources other than the central government budget. So if you look at the top panel, which illustrates the funding required from the central government budget, alongside the amount that has actually been mobilized or has been raised, it's pretty good, right? So by 2024, toward the end of Jokowi's tenure as president, around 99%, almost 100% of the 89.4 trillion has been raised. What's concerning, though, is the bottom panel, right? So this figure compares the required and raised funding from non-central government budget sources, which includes SOEs, BUMN again, and PPPs. So the gap is quite striking, the vertical gap between what is required and what is, ends up being raised, right? And with fulfillment lower than 20%. So that means realization was way less than what was initially planned. And to be fair, Jokowi has tried to attract more investment for building Nusantara, right? Offering tax breaks and other financial incentives. But many investors were hesitant due to uncertainties about the project's long-term sustainability. So politically, the end of Jokowi's term in office created uncertainty for private investors who were not sure whether Nusantara project would continue under the new president, Prabowo Subianto. And financially, the project's remote location and nascent population created another layer of uncertainty. So to sum up two things here, one, there's little indication that private funding can sufficiently be mobilized in the near term. And two, there is a heavy reliance on the APBN, the central government budget, which reflects Jokowi's state-led approach to infrastructure development in general, right? But as I mentioned earlier, Nusantara is different from other infrastructure projects in one respect, its scale. So the financial requirements are simply too large to be sustained or to be fulfilled through APBN allocations alone. And another way to look at this, if private funding for Nusantara has not been sufficiently mobilized to cover the cost, that means that public funding will be needed for the project to continue. So the next question is, are these costs politically acceptable to the public? And to answer this, I'll hand the presentation over to Tom to present the next section based on survey data. Tom, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiro, and greetings to everybody. It's my great pleasure to join you all and to share our research on IKN. Can everybody see the screen here? Is this shared effectively, properly? And let me see if I can make it do the full screen mode. How's that look? Are we good?
Now it's gone, Tom.
It's gone. Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay. Let me see if I can share one more time. So
It's good enough. Yeah, that's fine.
Is okay? Okay.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, I'll just keep going. So let me pick up where Chiro left off with this slide here. So the question that we've left with is, given an insufficient funding base from public funds, from private funds, the successful completion of the Nusantara infrastructure project is going to require some other source of funds. Public funds would be the most natural alternative here. And so what we wanted to know in the second large part of the paper is whether or not there is a broad appetite in Indonesia among the voting public for paying for IKN in this way. So we're going to start by looking at a general survey question. I've reproduced it for you up here about general support for IKN. So this question is asking Indonesian respondents, perhaps they've heard of the new...
Sorry, Tom. Now it looks, it's double.
I don't know.
And it get clipped on the right-hand side.
Oh dear. Let me try to stop sharing one more time. And maybe I'll share one more time. Is this any better?
Yep.
Now if I go like this, is it okay?
Yeah, good.
Okay. All right. I'll try not to touch anything else. We'll just see it. Let's let it go from here. So our question is whether or not there's general support for IKN. And this is going to serve as our baseline because it's going to tell us, first off, to what extent is there support for Nusantara in the abstract? And it's also going to allow us to examine the correlates of support for Nusantara. And I will say that this data is taken from a large research project called CCAP, which is a survey project being run by Nicholas Kuipers and Niall Sumaktoyo. Nick is now at Princeton and Niall is at NUS. And it's a series of rolling surveys of Indonesian public opinion for in the run-up to the 2024 election. And so we were able to insert some questions on those surveys, and that's what is the basis of our findings here. So first, just broad descriptively, over time, between February and December 2024, here is the distribution of responses to this question of how much do Indonesians support IKN. And what you're going to see in this figure is not a lot of change over time, which is important. So opinion about IKN is fairly stable over time, but also that the majority of respondents are in either the green or the red chunks of these bar charts. That signifies either support or strong support for IKN. So as a broad, abstract and general matter, we find that Indonesians are very supportive of the plan to move the capital from Jakarta to Nusantara. And this accords well with the general perception that the public infrastructure and city management problems associated with Jakarta are of such a scale that a new capital city is required. Now, the question is that we're interested in knowing, again, is not just general support, but the extent to which Indonesians would be willing to trade off other forms of public spending in order to obtain the funding needed to support IKN. But for now, I just want to start by examining in a little bit more detail the correlates of support for IKN. And we're going to do this using a simple ordered logistic regression framework that allows us to predict each of those responses across Indonesian survey respondents with separate coefficients estimated for month, province, and then a series of demographic covariates. And we're going to make inferences about the correlates of support from this regression. And we'll do so by showing you figures that look like this. So what this is showing you is the predicted probability of support for IKN, so each of the four answers that we saw previously, across age cohorts, controlling for all of the other determinants in the regression that we saw previously. And this first analysis is important for our argument because it allows us to begin to apprehend the generational trade-offs that Indonesians may perceive. We were concerned perhaps that older Indonesians would be more supportive of IKN than younger Indonesians because younger Indonesians stand to pay more in future tax burden if public funds are going to be used. And as we see here, there's actually not a lot of variation by age cohorts. Basically, most Indonesians remain strongly supportive of IKN regardless of how old they are. So that leads us to ask questions. So like, what is correlated with support for IKN? Given the high average level of support, are there subgroups that are more or less favorable? Our next analysis looks at predicted support by income, by education, and by religious affiliation. And I think the main finding to look at here is the left and the center plots show that there's not a lot of variation in support for IKN according to respondents' income or level of education. There is quite a bit of difference in terms of support by religion. And what we find predominantly is that non-Muslim respondents are more intensely supportive of IKN than Muslim respondents. But among all religious groups, the support is quite high. Now let's look at respondents by province. And so now we're looking at different regional determinants of support for IKN. And what we observe here, I think most notably, is that support for IKN is highest in the provinces that are closest to IKN. And so that in particular is East Kalimantan and West Sulawesi. We also see that the intensity of support is lowest in places that stand to lose from the relocation of the capital city, and that's Banten, Jakarta, and West Java. Now what we're going to do is examine in a similar way the main research hypothesis. So now that we understand that there's not a lot of variation by age, by income, by education, and that the majority of the variation in support, and especially the intensity of support, comes by region, we want to ask whether or not there's differences in support for various funding sources to pay for IKN. And so here what we've done is we've plotted by these age groups responses to questions that were similar to the one that were just asked, but asked respondents to what extent they would be willing to use public domestic, private, or foreign funds to pay for IKN. What we see is there's not a lot of variation by age. The main finding is that Indonesians are reluctant on average to use foreign sources to pay for IKN relative to public and domestic private sources. But there's not a lot of variation across respondents. Especially surprising to us is there's not a lot of variation by age group, by age cohort. Perhaps more important is this figure, which shows us differences in support for Nusantara when we ask explicitly whether or not Indonesians would be willing to make a trade-off between paying for one using public funds to pay for one government activity versus others. And what we find is this is a lot to show you that IKN is viewed as less important in terms of in the context of budget trade-offs than fuel subsidies, social spending, healthcare spending, education spending, everything basically except for civil servant salaries, which is meaningful as an estimate of the extent to which Indonesians would be willing to make these trade-offs. The second to last important figure that I want to show you here is whether or not when we ask Indonesians about these trade-offs that they might make, are they willing to pay more taxes? Are they willing to accept future services, either now in the top row or in the future in the bottom row? And what we find is that Indonesian survey respondents, despite their broad and quite deep support for IKN as an abstract matter, they do not support making any trade-offs in order to accomplish these goals. And so they prefer not to be taxed more, either now or in the future, and they would prefer not to have fewer public services either now or in the future. So to sum up, here's what we've learned. From Chiro's presentation, Nusantara's long-term financial viability will depend on funds from the state. There does not appear to be any appetite in the private sector for paying for IKN. This is going to generate intertemporal budget trade-offs that are quite stark. And from my analysis of the survey data, I think that we can find that despite there being fairly broad support for IKN as an abstract matter, there's not a lot of support for taking concrete steps to pay for it using public funds. And we'll just close by noting that the changing political economy of 2026, both under the new administration and given the uncertainty in the global economy, will create still more challenges. Our contribution stops short of analyzing these sort of issues, but we think that going forward, this is going to be a rich area for research. So with that, I'll close and I'll thank you, and I look forward to questions and discussion in just a little bit. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Chiro, for insightful presentation. So we've listened to two issues being assessed here, the public funding and also public support. Now let's move on to the third issue, and that is about the welfare effect of IKN. So over to Alex.
Great. So thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to join you all. And I think hopefully, some of the stuff that you see in this paper kind of relates to some of the stuff that Tom and Chiro talked about. So this is joint work with co-authors Radine and Yao, who are my former PhD students, and with Yi Jiang at the Asian Development Bank, who helpfully funded some of this work. When we're thinking about kind of creating a new capital, we're kind of trying to think about some of the sort of challenges that it might kind of overcome. And one is sort of, large kind of spatial differences in economic activity across locations, right? So Indonesia is a country with a lot of population concentration in Java. It's, sort of, there's big differences in employment, educational opportunities, and healthcare over space. And there's a question of sort of whether there's spatial misallocation. So Indonesia has some very big congested megacities. And so maybe there's too much concentration, or maybe, there's not enough concentration, not enough agglomeration, and because of large rural population, there's a gain from creating a new city. The other big challenge that many developing countries are facing is climate change. So the IPC is forecasting that by 2100, sea levels could rise by 1.1 meters. Many coastal megacities in Southeast Asia are facing extreme risks from coastal flooding and rising sea levels. And Jakarta has a unique kind of problem with subsidence. It's sort of the fastest sinking city in the world. And so as a consequence, some countries are, abandoning their megacity capitals. And so this is, again, a picture of the IKN location. So you're moving, as Chiro said, vast distances, 800 miles across the Java Sea. And this construction has been ongoing. And as we sort of talked about, the budget for this project, at least the first phase, is quite large, $35 billion potentially. The project's still unfinished. I guess Jokowi in September 2024 said it could take 30, 10, 15, or 20 more years. But the government's expecting that the city will have a population of about 1.9 million by 2045. We're sort of interested in capital relocations broadly and thinking about developing a framework for assessing these. This is actually not an uncommon policy. So Chiro talked about capital relocations that have happened already. Something like 30 countries or 15% of the countries in the world pursued a policy of creating a new capital between 1900 and 2024. And this involves relocating civil servants and sometimes creating a planned new city. And several new capital projects are sort of ongoing. The promises of these projects are potentially to decongest megacities, to sort of act as a more resilient option for housing and production in the face of climate change, and to be a potentially more efficient reallocation of labor across space. But there's sort of some pitfalls, right? So what is the effect of these policies on national welfare? Are you just kind of reshuffling economic activity around from one place to another in a costly way? And this is a costly project. So is a new capital just kind of a white elephant project? So what we're going to do in this paper is try to develop a kind of a new dynamic quantitative spatial model of economic geography with public sector employment and infrastructure improvements. And the idea is that when IKN comes online, we're going to have all of these high-wage civil servants that are going to kind of increase their demand for locally produced services and products, and that's going to be really a place-making policy. The hope is that and more attractive, that could kind of attract workers away from less desirable areas and lead to growth and welfare impacts. But there are also, potential fiscal externalities, right? So government wages might have to increase to attract workers to this location. The construction of the capital itself is expensive, and that could lead to lower public goods, which would lead to sort of suffering by everybody. So we're going to develop this model and carefully calibrate it with data from Indonesia and sort of simulate the welfare and growth and spatial inequality effects of the capital relocation policy under some different scenarios. In particular, we're interested in the response to the welfare effects under climate change. And so just to sort of a big picture of the results, we actually find that the relocation of civil servants and the infrastructure that's built in the area of IKN actually reduces welfare and output. And so why is this happening? Well, Jakarta is a big city. It's productive. It's not going to go away as a consequence of this new capital. And so Jakarta, is going to stick around. And so the manufacturing jobs in the new capital are going to be filled by local migrants. And this is actually going to divert workers away from very productive, high amenity places nearby. The new capital is also not a particularly attractive place for workers. So the lower amenities of this location mean that in order for the civil servant kind of labor market to clear, government wages are going to have to go up quite a bit, and that's going to lead to fiscal externality, which is going to lead to lower revenues to provide for public services nationally. We find that the welfare losses scale with the number of civil servants that are transferred. And we also find that the policy is not as bad under climate change, but sort of the welfare effects are fairly similar if you kind of use a fixed fundamentals baseline where you ignore climate change, or where you allow kind of sea levels to rise and temperatures to change, eroding local fundamentals. And so the intuition for this is that, on the one hand, Indonesia is equatorial, and so rising temperature is going to affect all locations fairly similarly. But two, that sort of the sea level rise is going to really impact Jakarta, but most of the relocation is going to be local to Nusantara. So sea level rise is going to really lead to local migrations away from Jakarta, and it's not going to kind of send people away, from Jakarta to Nusantara. And we also use the model to see, what if they had chosen a different site for the new capital, and we find other locations would have been welfare improving and growth enhancing. Particularly, Balikpapan would have been, a very nice choice for a new capital. And so this is a big paper. We try to do a lot of things. One thing I want to touch base on briefly is this idea that, our model is sort of assuming persistence and perfect implementation. And so we're going to try to study both of these using kind of reduced form evidence from actual capital relocations that have occurred in recent decades. And so we're going to use a synthetic difference and differences design with gridded population data and study the capital relocations that occurred in Kazakhstan, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Myanmar. And we find a lot of heterogeneous country experiences. So some new capitals were very successful. So Astana and Abuja led to large growth in population and built up areas. But there were some smaller insignificant effects, and so Dodoma is a good example of a very slow, long drawn out new capital relocation. And Naypyidaw, the sort of new capital in Myanmar, which is basically just a compound for civil servants, just had no population growth. There was no sort of local multiplier. One thing we do find across all of this is that the old capitals kind of have no changes in population growth, which really emphasizes this persistence that our model allows for. So what I want to do, and please just keep me to time, I just want to sort of describe the quantitative model, then talk about policy simulations and conclude. And I don't have a lot of time to go through the mathematical details of the model, so I'll try to kind of keep things fairly intuitive. So workers in the model are going to make forward-looking migration choices. And so basically, they're going to kind of value locations on their amenities, their real wages, and local public goods. And they're going to choose a location that kind of benefits them currently, but also allows for the options of migrating to nearby locations in the future that are attractive. The model is going to have trade, and it's going to have migration frictions between heterogeneous districts. So districts are the spatial unit in the model. We're going to have multiple employment sectors, so formal manufacturing, informal, you can think about these as sort of local services, as well as government employment. And these firms are going to produce goods. Government isn't a firm, but formal and informal firms are going to produce goods that workers consume, and they offer employment opportunities. And public sector wages and local public goods are going to be financed through formal sector tax revenue. And we're going to allow for a national transfer system that can help poorer districts that don't have a lot of formal firms to finance local public goods. And so the model is going to have two forces of persistence. So slow moving populations in kind of economic geography. So migration costs are going to be really important. And amenities, the sort of attractiveness of a location, as well as productivity, are going to kind of slowly evolve endogenously based on historical and contemporaneous population. And so, the policy in the model is essentially we're going to move civil servants from Jakarta to Nusantara in 2030, and we're going to boost amenities and productivity by kind of 20%. Again, this is a baseline. We do a lot of robustness with this, but think of this as like an infrastructure program. And so when we're thinking about how new capital affects welfare, there's sort of labor reallocation effects. So is labor moving to better places that have higher amenities, higher wages, higher public goods, and better kind of migration option values? What is the effect of the program on real wages? So the new capital is definitely going to increase its kind of real wages, but these gains could be offset by losses elsewhere. What is the effect on local public goods kind of nationally? So, raising wages for the new capital servants, civil servants, and kind of paying for this infrastructure could have some big fiscal externalities. Amenities are going to change endogenously, Jakarta could become less congested, and that could be valuable. One thing I wanted to do is, in a very simple, stylized model, let's suppose we just have 3 locations, and I'm going to look at population shares over periods. So periods are like 10 years in the model. This is formal sector employment in location 1. Location 1's the old capital. This is government employment in the old capital. This is government employment in the new capital, and formal sector employment in the new capital. And we're going to assume that the old capital is going to experience some amenity erosion. So think about rising sea levels, deteriorating land, and making it hard to live. That's going to kind of increase the cost of housing. What we see is the baseline. This is the sort of white circles that without capital relocation, we see that kind of people move away from the old capital and they move into the new capital, but they do so fairly slowly. But if we have capital relocation, and that's the blue lines, what happens is that migration to the new capital, to location 2, is much more rapid. So people move rapidly away from location 1. They move very quickly to the new capital, location 2. And this just shows the civil servants that are moving. So the new capital accelerates migration and can effectually coordinate a response to climate risks. And so here I'm looking at the welfare effects of this new capital in this toy model under different levels of amenity erosion. So if the amenity erosion is small, this is not going to kind of benefit the economy. But if you have a large enough amenity erosion and sea levels rise fast enough, then that can lead to boosts in welfare. This is kind of just to highlight some conceptual points in the model. But to take this model seriously, we need to kind of use the full model and all of the data. This is a big slide on kind of how we take the model to the data. So we're going to use census data, which is going to give us employment by sector. We're going to use Sakaras data for wages. Economic census data is going to help us get a sense of kind of the entry costs and like taxes and production wedges. And the Ministry of Finance is going to help us kind of calibrate local tax rates and transfer rates. The model is going to have a migration gravity equation that we can use census data to kind of estimate migration costs. And then we're going to take a bunch of parameters on kind of spillovers, elasticity of substitution from the literature. And again, there's just way too much to kind of cover in a short presentation, but just to give you a flavor of what we do. So the first thing I want to do is just study what would happen if there was no climate change. So let's just assume that local fundamentals that govern productivity and amenities are fixed at their 2020 values. And we're going to assume that the economy eventually reaches a steady state in the year 2200. We do some robustness to that number. It doesn't change too much. And then we're going to simulate Nusantara, which is a permanent transfer of civil servants from Jakarta to Nusantara. And we're going to assume that there's a boost in infrastructure, which raises local productivity and amenity fundamentals in the new capital. So this is what happens to population in Nusantara. So again, in the baseline, basically without the new capital, what the model predicts is that this is not an attractive location. And so people are going to gradually move away from this location. And the sort of population shares are, effectively going to die out to a very small number in the steady state. But with the new capital, we do see this boost. So the sort of the new capital district gets, a 64% increase in its population. If you take population estimates and kind of the models in shares, but if you kind of multiply these shares by the projected populations of Indonesia in say 2090, the peak is about 0.5 million, which is much smaller than the 1.9 million projection. Jakarta is going to lose a fair number of people, but in terms of shares, population shares don't change very much. And so this sort of modest decline in its total employment is really suggestive of persistence, right? So this is an attractive city. And I think if you look at, countries that have experienced capital relocations, I guess the best example of this is Brazil. Rio is still a very hot, attractive city. It hasn't lost its stature in kind of economic geography in Brazil. And so I think this is something that's likely to happen in Indonesia's setting. So this is a table with kind of the welfare effects. So the overall welfare effect is about a 0.6% reduction in welfare and about a 1% reduction in GDP. Jakarta loses a lot in terms of its welfare and output. This is probably why support for the new capital is much smaller in Jakarta and kind of areas nearby. Nusantara gets a big boost to welfare, and workers' real GDP increases a lot, and most of the gains basically come from local reallocation. Basically, workers that are moving in to the new capital, they don't come from Jakarta because migration costs are really high. They're going to move away from kind of nearby places. One other thing to note is that kind of civil servant wages have to increase substantially relative to civil servant wages in Nusantara. So it's like a 300% increase in capital government wages. That's a large thing, and that's going to mean that local public goods are going to have to decline nationally everywhere, and that's going to be a big kind of a loss in welfare. This is a map that shows, kind of where population gains occur in blue and where population losses occur. And so, Jakarta loses population, the Nusantara district gains population, and people are moving in from kind of nearby areas. It's not a perfect kind of, plot, but just to give you a sense of where workers are moving in. And a lot of these places that they move away from, so nearby cities like Balikpapan and Samarinda, these are very productive cities. And so that loss translates into losses in productivity, which increases prices and leads to losses in welfare. This is the kind of decomposition of that 0.6, 0.59 national welfare effect into kind of labor reallocation effects, changes in real wages, changes in local public goods, and changes in amenities. And so we see that sort of there is a benefit to the new capital in terms of reducing congestion. That's the sort of increase in kind of endogenous amenities. But the sort of labor reallocation effects are kind of really driving a substantial share of the welfare loss. And we also find this fiscal externality is sizable. It's not non-trivial. So,
minutes, Alex?
Yes. Are we?
Maybe 5 minutes, yeah.
Oh, 5 minutes. Yeah. I'll wrap up. So the final thing I wanted to talk about is the new capital under climate change. So this is just a map showing kind of increases in temperature. We actually see that Kalimantan is expected to warm more rapidly than Java, but the sort of differences are fairly small in the 0.2, 0.3 degrees Celsius. The standard deviation of temperature change is fairly small. And we're going to use kind of a two-way fixed effects regression to predict how temperature impacts local fundamentals and predict, what will happen to local fundamentals as a consequence of climate change. This is kind of sea level rise, and so we're using SSP 2 to 4.5 kind of middle of the road, which suggests that sea levels will rise by about 1 meter in 2100. We also incorporate subsidence projections. And so if you just look at the direct effect of changes in local fundamentals, so rising temperature is going to lead to big losses in amenities, relatively little labor reallocation effects. When you account for subsidence, what happens, and sea level rise, this is going to lead to people moving away from productive places and lead to kind of overall welfare losses. But the combined effects of just this direct kind of climate shock are kind of losses in welfare of something like 3.2%. But when we evaluate Nusantara under climate change, we do see that sort of accounting for temperature, sea level rise, and subsidence, the welfare losses decline. So the sort of negative welfare effects attenuate. But this isn't a big, these numbers are fairly similar to one another. So what's happening? I think Claire Balboni's job market paper on coastal transport infrastructure in Vietnam, finds like a 35% difference in assessing the welfare effects of this transport infrastructure when you take into account climate change. Well, one, I think that rising temperature affects all locations very similarly, so there's sort of no scope for reversal of fortune. The coastal areas like Jakarta are badly impacted by sea level rise. But Nusantara is really attracting local migrants, and so with or without Nusantara, the reallocation of people is going to be very local. The final thing I want to show you is just a histogram, and so this is just a histogram of we basically look at 260 other possible capital relocations. And so this is just the percent change in GDP as a consequence of those capital relocations. So the first thing to say is that there are a lot of bad potential sites that they could have chosen, that policymakers could have chosen for the new capital. There are some good ones though, right? And so only 12.7% of sites saw positive increases in output. Balikpapan and Bandung, so Balikpapan being the nearest city that is closest to Nusantara, Bandung being another city that's very close to Jakarta. These are sites that could have been welfare improving and growth enhancing. And we find that the best sites tend to have larger initial employment shares, higher initial output, and greater levels of migration market access. And so if you're going to choose a new capital, maybe don't create a new one in a greenfield site, and try not to use this as a progressive placemaking policy. So just to conclude, we kind of developed this new quantitative spatial model to try to predict the effects of indigenous capital relocation. We find that welfare, increases. Nusantara benefits the local residents, but it sort of reduces welfare nationally. And the job growth comes from local reallocation. We also find that Nusantara is less bad under climate change, but not all that much, and site selection is really important. So thanks. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. It was very comprehensive and interesting and rich with information. So let's now move on to question and answers. I saw some questions already in the Q&A box. There are two questions. I assume this is also for Aichiro and Tom, and then two questions for Alex. I'll start with a question from Dr. Dorendra Wardana. He was wondering about if you make clusters of respondents based on professions like civil servants, workers with projects from government, such as development partners, vendors, etc. His hunch is that some groups might show different level of resistance, support, or support than others. Chiro or Tom?
Yeah, I could quickly respond to this. Tom, you might add to this later. So I think that's a very reasonable hypothesis, right? So, and we do account for it by including employment status as a control in the analysis. And we have also the appendix as part of the main paper posted in the PEACE website, right? So the results, I think the main point is that the patterns are quite stable even after controlling for occupation. So I do not see a strong evidence that particular professional groups like civil servants drive the results. Tom, what do you think, though?
Yeah, just I'll echo what Chiro said. We explicitly tried to study this. The first idea we had is that those occupational differences might explain the broad pattern of findings. We find that's not true. But also when we just narrowly look at civil servants versus others, however you slice the data, we don't find much differences at all. So I think it's an interesting reflection on what support for EKN really means. It's not really grounded in economic fundamentals in the perspective of most respondents.
Great. Thanks, guys. Next is from Jim Riker, whose question is about shared and sustained political leadership. So bear with me. Committing to the new capital locks in future political leaders and likely precludes the pursuit of other major initiatives and alternatives in order to complete all 5 phases of the EKN project by 2045. At least 4 and as many as 7 Indonesian presidents will preside over the project's lifetime. Is this project an albatross for future political leaders, or Indonesia's only opportunity to get it right and ensure a promising future for the government and the nation? Maybe you would like to tackle this first, Tom?
Sure. The original title of this paper was From White Elephant to White Whale. So I think albatross is a pretty good word to describe the long-term implications of this. Of EKN. And I don't frankly think it binds any future president. There are plenty of examples of projects that are just sort of halted. But I do think that it's quite striking, Jim. Your observation is correct. To carry this out as articulated and planned would require, cooperation across many different presidential cycles of a form which I don't think that we have seen in Indonesia in recent years.
Chiro?
Yeah, and I think there's also leadership dynamic here. Like each president in Indonesia and also elsewhere, wants to establish their own legacy. So EKN is very Jokowi, right? It's closely associated with Joko Widodo and probably to Gibran, right? But other presidents, like for example, Prabowo Subianto, may prioritize different flagship programs like MBK, like the free lunch program. So I would slightly push back on the idea that EKN locks in future leaders, and we're seeing some flexibility even right now. Lower budget allocations under Prabowo for EKN and much more budget for the free lunch program. So that really shows different priorities and different budget allocations for different programs.
So just to follow up on Chiro, so what is the status now? Is it continuing, or is it slowing down, or is it put on hold, or what is it now?
So from my reading, I think President Prabowo Subianto, he issued a new, presidential regulation postponing the inauguration or the relocation to 2028. So he's not saying hard no, but he's saying 2028. And I think this is very Indonesia, right? You're kind of, you stand in between. It's not a no, but it's not a yes. But really from the budget, because budget reflects, what is prioritized by the government. And we see that Prabowo prioritizes the free lunch program more than EKN project.
Okay, thanks. So let's move on to questions to Alex. First is from Akila Putri. She's curious if you can say anything about the welfare for new workers who migrate to the new capital. My sense is that in the beginning, there would not be as many firms hiring, and thus those early firms could act as monopsony and suppress wages. And also, do you have a sense of the elasticity of civil servants? You discussed the dynamics of labor migration based on infrastructure erosion. but curious if this can be exacerbated or moderated by looking at the civil servants' elasticity to their jobs. Alex?
Yeah, so I think that there's a good couple of questions. So I think, the first is about kind of the market structure and the new capital. So in our model, we kind of assume monopsonistic competition and that over time, this competitive structure kind of stays the same. I do think it would be really interesting to potentially explore a model where as the new capital gets more workers, kind of we move away from a monopsony and lots of market power to sort of a more kind of competition and wages can increase. That'd be really interesting to look at for sure. I don't have a ton of again. There's not a lot of way to sort of discipline that with data, but that would be kind of a really interesting kind of potential extension. The second question is about civil servants and kind of their elasticities of migration. I think that one thing that I would really like to do with this kind of a model is to think about so like what are civil servants producing? In our model, they're producing a national public good, right? And that's kind of the rule of law, that's kind of contract enforcement, maybe paying for the military. And there's a sense in which when you move the new capital, some people just don't want to move, and so they're going to find different jobs. And so in the United States kind of experienced a little bit of this when under the Trump administration, they kind of relocated some of the Department of Agriculture to Kansas. And a lot of civil servants that were working in the Department of Agriculture were just like, I don't want to move to Kansas. And so they left their jobs. That could lead to an erosion of local public goods or national public goods as the civil servant quality declines. So that'd be something that'd be super interesting to look at. I don't have I'm trying to discipline the model with moments and data, and so looking at that I think would be really important.
Great. Next one is also for you, Alex. Then this is from RC Halomoan. Sorry. What does your model assume about population growth, given the trend in decreasing total fertility rate in Asia? Indonesia is likely to follow the trend. How does this affect your model, especially the welfare effect at the national level?
Yeah, so our model is actually a model where workers live forever. So we don't make any kind of, we sort of assume that population is constant, and so everything is in shares. It would be possible to extend this to a model with endogenous fertility. Again, it's a little more complicated. But that's something that we can certainly look at in the future. But yeah, I do think the sort of Indonesia's experienced a big population boom, and it's likely that that's not going to continue. But I don't think any of the substantive conclusions. If fertility rates are equal across locations, then there's everything I've talked about is going to be totally fine. And, if they're different across different locations, that's when, the model would have to adapt.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any more questions in the chat. For the audience, if you want to ask question directly, you can also raise your virtual hand, and I'll let you ask directly. But while waiting for that, Alex, I have a question about your model as well. On the tax, if I'm not mistaken, you assume the funding will come from tax collection, right? So can you elaborate on that? What is the assumption? Is it exogenous, or because the tax revenue now is really low. So what does that play a role in your
Yeah, exactly. So our model has a formal and an informal sector, and that's right. I mean, I think Indonesia is basically collecting maybe 8% of GDP in terms of its tax revenue. It's quite low. A lot of that has to do with just the large number of workers that are working in the informal sector, and over time, as workers. Kind of can switch into the formal sector where kind of wages are higher and tax rates are higher. And so we try to calibrate these tax rates with existing data. We don't make these are kind of parameters that are calibrated from data and they're exogenous, and so we don't make any assumptions about them changing over time.
Another one that I was curious about is that in your synthetic group, you have 4 cases from 4 countries, right? Why is there no like Malaysian case, for example, that's closer to Indonesia? Just because of data availability?
So my recollection is that we were trying to study long distance capital relocations. And so
okay.
I was worried that because we're looking at gridded population data with satellite imagery, and so it's sort of hard to disentangle what's happening when these 2 locations are really close together. And so for the new capitals, we're comparing cities. We're comparing the new capital location to other locations in the same country. And so for the old capitals, we're comparing, the relocated or the capital city that loses its status to other cities in the same continent that didn't lose their status. So that's kind of the comparison that we made.
Okay, great. Thanks. Now I see another question from Jim Riker. I'm happy to read it, Jim, but I'm going to ask you if you want to ask directly, and we'll open your microphone. Do you want to ask directly? One. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So
go ahead.
My question is for Aichiro and Tom, and I'm wondering if the challenge here is how does Indonesia maintain their government capacity to meet their future needs, and it seems that if you're jumping between these 2 capitals and none have been fully realized, the question is it really realistic to have Indonesia's efforts funded by public-private funding? The question really is can we ask private investors to fully sign on to the government's plans without wanting to influence, shape, and potentially distort or pervert the overall plans and derail them?
Okay, thanks, Jim. Over to you, Chiro or Tom.
I can start. Realistically, it's very difficult at present, right? So results show private and like financing options receive much lower public, especially. So there are 2, right? Domestic private or foreign private. Foreign private receives much less support from the public, and then domestic private, it's fine. Like people do not oppose this, but the realization or the amount that ends up being raised is very low. So I do not see it as a credible substitute for public funding. And we're asking if it is, if we could expect private financing to really chime in. I'm not sure about right now, but probably in a few years, in 10 years, if the site in East Kalimantan, if Nusantara then grows into a thriving city, then probably private sectors would be more willing, would be more inclined to put their money in. So really the first move would really need the government to put in more money, right? But the problem is the government is budget constrained. So that's kind of the budget dilemma that we are facing right now.
Tom?
Nothing to add. Jiro said that very well.
All right. Great. Thanks. Next question, new question for Alex here. Based on your research, it seems that IKN should be stopped. It's likely not going to happen in the short term. What would make the welfare cost lower?
Yeah, so I think this is a really good question. So our papers currently R&R at the Economic Journal, and I think this is a question that we got from the referees, and so I think one thing we can do with this model is to figure out so the government's doing this, and so like what are the conditions under which this kind of a policy is going to be more successful, and so there are some kind of variables that we can play around with. So. We do find that, as the infrastructure investments improve local productivity and amenities, that the welfare effects are kind of better. And so that's something that I think we can talk a lot about. If migration costs were lower and it was, we're using historical migration costs to kind of predict what migration costs will be like in the future. If if it becomes much more attractive and migration costs fall for workers, that's a potential thing that could make the welfare costs lower. But that's something that we need to dive into in our revisions to the paper. So I think this is a really good question. The other thing I want to say is that the way we're kind of evaluating this model is kind of looking at a measure of national welfare. But the social planner could have a very different objective function, which is that they're trying to reduce inequality across locations, right? And so if we think that we're trying to kind of promote equality of opportunity and kind of minimize these location differences, then something like a spatial inequality measure could actually be more important. And so we provide that, and we do find that this definitely improves opportunities in the outer islands, and that could be something that'd be very valuable to the country.
All right. Thank you so much. Any other questions from the audience? No. I have one question to you, Chiro and Tom. Your paper concludes that there is actually very strong support for the project, right? But the funding is very small, and also that support is only if they think it's not their own money, right? So my question is, this support, is it related to the popularity of Jokowi, and people still perceive this is Jokowi's project, Jokowi's pet, and that's why they really support it, because of course Jokowi has very strong popularity. So what do you see or sense in the near future if Jokowi's popularity is going down? Will we see the support of the project is also going down, maybe in favor of Prabowo's pet projects like MBG or others?
So our paper shows that your intuition is correct. The best predictor of support for IKN is opinions about Jokowi. And quite interestingly, none of the other results change if we include Jokowi support as a predictor in the model. But basically, you're right. Like these things are very highly correlated with one another. The chi-square values are like 10 trillion. It's about as strongly correlated as you can imagine. I'm not sure if declining popularity for Jokowi in 2026 would affect support for IKN in 2026. I suspect that even though this is a signature project of his, and that may explain the original popularity of the project, it could be that as the memory of Jokowi's time in office recedes, but IKN does not, that these become separate. So I think we'll have to wait and see. But my own intuition is that this might be something that has escaped Jokowi's orbit over time. But still, all the caveats about do you want to pay for it actually still do apply.
Right.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So I think I found the support kind of stuff really, really fascinating. I was just curious if you guys explored any different ways of framing the question in the survey, kind of leading with costs or kind of yeah, not talking about cost, talking about the benefits to decongesting Jakarta and kind of
That's a great question. No, we didn't actually try to see if like we reminded people of other things that might go along with it. We basically framed this in terms of trade-offs. Like, here are the things that you can't pay for if you pay for this. But I guess we didn't prime them with any intrinsic, and this may be a weakness of the questions, we didn't give them any intrinsic values that EKN itself would produce, aside from the financial costs. My hunch, however, is that when people think really hard about whether or not creating new capital cities can actually decongest Jakarta, they think, well, the effect of that is likely to be very small because Jakarta is enormous. I think your question is a good one. I don't think that it's going to make much of a difference.
Anything you want to add, Chiro?
No, but I think just to add to Tom's point, I just want to highlight like the symbolic support and material support, like the real support, and just, like people really like the idea of IKN, like moving the capital, and as I mentioned earlier, this is not a new idea in Indonesia. It was brought up during the Sukarno era in the 50s. Right. But what this research reveals is that when people like the idea of moving the capital, they do not necessarily like the idea of paying for it, right? Nobody likes to pay higher taxes, and nobody likes when they receive less public services, right? So I think this is a thing that would apply, in general. Had we switched the question, not IKN, but some other, white elephant project, probably we would get the same inclination, right? Because the idea is that people like the idea of having something new, but when we ask them, like, are you willing to pay for it? Probably the answer is no.
Yeah. Lydia has a question. Go ahead, Lydia.
Okay, so I might be reading the presentation or the paper incorrectly, but there is large support. I mean, there is not as much non-support among the educated and the higher income. So what I would guess is that the educated and the higher income knows that it's going to come from their tax money. Why is it that they're not more against? Why do you think they're not more against the project? Like, I would say that the educated is more read more news, know that it comes from their project, where the money comes from, there is trade-off and so forth. So if that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. Why is there not really a strong income or education gradient? One possibility that I think is worth considering is that we could have asked them about how much they care about their tax burden, and we have the data to do that analysis, right? When we think about trade-offs, do higher income Indonesians or more educated Indonesians perceive a greater trade-off? So I didn't present those results, but we could calculate those things. But I actually think that we're going to find relatively similar results as well. I think that the support for IKN in the abstract is nationalistic in nature. It's because it's a good because it sounds like a pro-Indonesian development policy, and it's a little bit distasteful to say that to admit you don't like it because of your own tax burdens. But when we ask people in principle about taxes for people in general, that's when they feel like they're able to make that sociotropic calculation there as well. So my sense is that it really is a policy that when we ask it in the abstract, people think in nationalistic terms, that it would be good to have a new capital city. And so putting it there seems like a good idea too.
Okay, I don't see any other questions nor virtual hands raised, so we might wrap up earlier. Oh yes, there is one now. From Alpha. This is to Chiro and Tom. What is your opinion regarding the current Constitutional Court decision? DKI Jakarta remains the capital of Indonesia. Chiro?
Yeah, I saw that news, and when I saw that news, I feel like, oh yeah, this is timely because we're gonna have this presentation on IKAI, right? So from my reading, the decision is to really remove ambiguity, right, and to add clarity. Like, what's the status of the capital right now? Is it in Jakarta or is it in East Kalimantan? So that decision removes ambiguity by stating that the capital of Indonesia is in Jakarta. That's my reading.
Okay, there is a hand raised by Nicholas Used. Nicholas, Lydia, can we help? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you see me?
No, we cannot see you.
Okay, that's good because I'm sitting on my back veranda without a shirt on. I'm very sorry, but I just opened the message that gave the announcement of this talk, and so I've missed the entire talk. But I'd be very, very interested in seeing it. I assume it'll be posted somewhere.
Yes.
Perhaps you could inform me where it'll be posted.
Yeah, Lydia will give information after this. Usually it's on our website, but of course, Lydia will give you exact information.
Okay, thank you very much.
No worries, thank you.
The reason I'm interested is I visited IKN about a month ago, and my first impressions were it's very impressive, but I can see that it's got an awfully long way to go until it's a fully fledged capital city, an operational capital city. But one of my concerns was that the government or the ministerial buildings have been put up in front of the palace area, in front of the DPR area. But it seems to me that these are rather small and that they'll need many more government buildings. I assume there's space for that. Do you have any comment on that?
Anyone wants to comment? No? But thanks for the observation, Nicholas. That's quite informative. I see a hand from Firman Witular. You have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks. Great presentation, all of you. I have a question to Alex, if time permits. I'm intrigued by the Balikpapan story. You seem to suggest that Balikpapan would have been a better choice. But looking ahead, do you think that Balikpapan could possibly function as an exit strategy for any future president who wants to abandon the project? Or if it happens, would Balikpapan actually stand to benefit from such a move?
Yeah, so I think this is a good question. So, I think the risk with this project, right, is that the new capital becomes something like Naypyidaw, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of government compound in Myanmar, but basically, civil servants work there. They do their 9 to 5 jobs, then they fly back to Yangon. So it's not a place where people live. It's not a place where people want to spend their money. It's just a place to work. And so on the weekends, there's a lot of empty roads. There's no congestion. It's just kind of a dead city. And so if they chose Balikpapan, all of this infrastructure is already built, right? So they've kind of invested a lot, and this stuff is durable. It's not going to go anywhere. So kind of moving this seems very, very challenging. I think one thing I'd like to do a little bit more with this model is to get a better sense of the synergies between Samarinda and Nusantara and Balikpapan, if there's sort of industrial specialization and kind of different industries that could really kind of benefit and spill over in this kind of triangle. At the moment, we don't have a lot of industry specificity in our model, but that would be something to kind of look at for kind of the sort of future directions. But I do think there's a real risk that this is kind of just a civil servant capital that nobody wants to kind of spend time and invest in, and I think that's a big concern. I think the other thing too is that Washington, D.C. was a planned capital in a swamp. And, if I had the United States data and I ran this model in 1790, would I have found the same results, right? And
Canberra.
Yeah, exactly. So, and these are very successful, livable cities. And so, what makes these things happen, and what doesn't? I think these are really important questions.
Great, but I guess Firman had a conflict of interest. He was born in Balikpapan.
I'm a Balikpapan boy.
Okay, because there's no more question, I'd like to thank Chiro, Tom, and Alex for sharing their studies with us. It's been very enlightening. And I think we learned a lot. Also thank the audience. I thank the team who put this event together, Lydia Napitupulu, Gilang Ramadan, Fairuz Salsabila, and Catherine Whitney. And before we close, I'll give the floor to Lydia. I'm sure she has some announcement and to close this webinar. Over to you, Lydia.
Just quickly to remind everyone that we still have another event this afternoon. So Canberra and ANU Indonesia project is hosting the Australasian Development Conference. So we have a lot of visitors coming to Canberra. And if you are in Canberra, please feel free to sign up for the in-person events. There's a few coming up in the next couple of days until the 5th. And unfortunately, some are not online, but you can check. I just put the link in our events page, so you can check and choose which you would like to attend. Again, thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you in our future future events. And thank you, Alex and Tom and Chiro, for your time today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.